Hello, I'd like to share with you some of my delight with Aquilegias, that's granny bonnets or columbines. And although my special interest is in growing the Aquilegia vulgaris and other cultivars and hybrids, here I'd like to show you a few of the species that I've grown over the year. My name's Carrie Thomas and I'm with Touchwood Plants. So Aquilegia vulgaris is what we would commonly grow here in the UK. And even with such one species, we have got many types of hybrids and cultivars that have been grown very often for centuries in the cottage gardens. And before we go any further, I'd like to just talk about the flower structure of an Aquilegia because it's quite delicate and quite unusual. These actually are petals. We'll look at these more closely in a moment. And very often they are hooked or curved, and that is where there is nectar that the bumblebees, typically with these vulgaris flowers, the bumblebees go inside here and put up their long tongues here. These are sepals, although they look like petals, so they can be called petaloid sepals. Sepals are usually green and quite leaf-like and will protect the bud, but here you can see they are protecting the bud here and this bud that hasn't opened. The central part, of course, is the sexual part of the plants. This is the anthers with the pollen that will be distributed on the bees. Now, tiny little bits inside there, they're not ripe yet, but if you can almost see them here, little greeny parts that are exerted further, those are the female, the sticky stigmas where the pollen will adhere. So let's look a little bit more closely. I've dissected this flower so you can see this is the petal. It's almost like a horn of plenty. It's hollow with the nectar at the end. If you were to put a line through here from where it's attached to the flower, this part down here is called the blade. And different species are known for different lengths and sizes and widths of their blades. As well as the hooked or curvedness or straightness of the spurs themselves. This is what I was talking about. This one looks much more petal-shaped than the petal I've shown you, but in fact is a sepal. And here are the male parts bearing the pollen, but here exerted, extruded, coming down and out. These are the ripe parts, the female parts, the stigma, where the pollen, hopefully from another plant, will adhere to and create new seeds. So let's look at different species. Now, this is short, and that is quite normal for Aquilegia bertolonii. So we're talking about an alpine plant with really normal-sized flowers, but on a very short plant. Let's look at that a little bit closer. So they've got quite long blades here, down below the sepals. And they've got slightly hooked spurs, but not much compared to what we will be seeing. The colours of these species are also important, but of course even they can have hybrids. This I grew as discolor, meaning two-coloured. It could also be Pyrenicum discolor as another synonym. So here we've got very hooked, beautiful spurs. We've got two-colour flowers. And the blades here are really quite tight and bell-shaped. The sepals might open slightly wider than this, and how wide the sepals are is also diagnostic between different species. So Discella is another of the alpine, the very short ones, with really quite huge flowers compared to the tiny size of the plant. Another of the short alpine ones, this is flabellata, but in the white form, the alba. And look how beautifully hooked and curled those are. This one, the sepals may open slightly more than that, but hardly any at all. So again, what people are, when they are deciding between different species, they will look at the axis of the flower to look at how wide the sepals are and how wide the blades are and how long they are compared to each other. Another diagnostic feature can be the flowering stem and the angle that the flower is held at. So this beautiful one is Aquilegia flabellata in the alba or white form. Totally different colour here. Now we're at some Asian forms of Asian species of Aquilegia. This is Aquilegia weigeriana. And I call this maroon and mustard. I think that they're absolutely gorgeous colours together. A little sombre, you don't want to put this in the darkest part of the garden. But look, we've got yellow coming into the colour range, which is something that our normal Aquilegias here in the UK, the Bulgara sort, they don't have yellow in at all. And you can see the angle that this is held at. This will open a little bit more. Similar colour. Don't get fooled by the fact that one was taken in brighter sunshine than the other, and one was with a digital camera and one wasn't. So the colours are actually quite similar in real life. And this one is oxysepala, Aquilegia oxysepala. Beautifully curled spurs here. And again, fairly bell-shaped with the blades together. Oh, look at this. We haven't got any spurs. So we've got the sepals and the petals, but without any spurs. There will still be a nectar reward. This is Aquilegia calcarata, also known, and some would prefer it to be in a different genus totally, and it could be semi-Aquilegia calcarata, depending on which authority you look at. And typically in this maroon, often two-tone shades. And this, what you're not getting a sense of is this is really quite a small, very delicate flower. So it's certainly smaller than those alpine ones, although the plant itself is taller, but not huge. What would it be? Perhaps a foot high? One of my favourite ones, this is Aquilegia viridiflora. Viridiflora, green flowered. Yeah, I'd call this chocolate and olive. I just love these colours. Not the largest of flowers, but certainly not small. And look at how swan-necked these are. So they're very long spurs with a curve to them. And perhaps even more dramatic is how the flowering stem is curved quite a long way back, so that it's almost U-shaped. And these flowers are definitely hanging downwards. And you can see here the hanging down right outside the bell of the flower are the stigmas. So let's look at another version of that. So this is exactly the same one, but under sunny conditions, it's a different plant, same species. Aquilegia viridiflora. These have been a bit burnt out, so you can't get the green aspect of it so much. But besides the female stigmas, you are also showing the pollen there. Now this is a large flower. This is Aquilegia fragrans. And can you see how wide these blades are? And how straight the spurs in this one. Although this isn't a species, it's a hybrid from Aquilegia fragrans. And but by the way, I expect a lot of you have thought fragrans. Does that mean fragrant? And yes, of course it does. And fragrance in Aquilegias is perhaps not something that you were expecting. But yes, we have got a fragrant Aquilegia, and so is that last one actually. Viridiflora also has a delicate fragrance. Moorcroftiana is possibly even more fragrant. So large flowers here on fragrans and on the hybrids from fragrans. Whoa, bright yellow. Now we're going over to America, to the US. This is Aquilegia chrysantha, the yellow columbine. So over here in the UK, we tend to call them granny's bonnets. Over there, columbines. And they are huge. This is an enormous flower with very, very long spurs. The spurs, as you can see, are straight. That's got a bit of a kink in it. It's evidently been a bit damaged. No bumblebee can possibly get their head in there and have a tongue long enough to come to here. What happens in my garden is that the bumblebees will come here, perch on the end of there and pierce with their tongues and be able to suck out the nectar. Look at the angle that this is held at, very much almost facing outwards, almost horizontal. And instead of these parts being tucked inside the flower, like with the vulgara sort, where they have to hang down as much as anything to stop all of the rain getting at them. We get a lot of rain here in Wales. Here they are poking out. And the pollen here is definitely ripe. So when the pollinator comes along, which in this case will be a moth with a very long tongue, then the moth will get covered with this and carry the pollen to another flower. Aquilegia chrysantha. This is a form of Aquilegia chrysantha with particularly long spurs. I bought the seed, or I got the seed, as Aquilegia longissima, meaning that basically the longest. These longissima actually is even longer than these spurs and often will be damaged or hanging down because they're so long. I have never ever managed to see in real life or to grow any of the longissima myself. Aquilegias, you're never quite sure what you're going to get from seed. They certainly allow all of the pollen to mix between species. Here's another delightful yellow one. Overall, slightly smaller than Aquilegia chrysantha. And it's a shorter plant. But one of the distinguishing features that I've found is the angle of the flowering stem. Again, we're looking at very much horizontal and quite splayed out long spurs. But this angle of the stem, it's certainly not hanging down, but the stem itself, I have not taken this photo at a funny angle. It's supposed to be, this is the vertical. So the stem itself is actually coming off at an angle. And the beauty here of Aquilegia caerulea. And these again are very large, long spurred flowers. but slightly raised up from the horizontal. They're just beginning to start to look upwards rather than horizontally or downwards. And I would love to see these growing in the wild, like in Colorado mountains. Great sheets of these huge flowers dancing in the breeze. Who knows, perhaps I will. From all of these large American ones come hybrid ones that have been probably bred for centuries in the US. So this one is Songbird series, and this is Songbird Cardinal. I'm also showing a few of the other Songbird series, but there's lots of other series and hybrids, such as the Macana ones, which have been around even longer than the more modern ones. And did I just miss one? No, sorry. And this one is Aquilegia Songbird Skylark and Songbird Chaffinch. The Songbird series are F1 hybrids, so have to be hand pollinated and with expensive price tags, but then again, they do come true from seed. Here's another of the long-spurred hybrids. This one isn't named or anything, but I wanted to show you because besides having white as the second colour, the American ones can also bring in yellow as the second colour. So long-spurred, large flowers with yellow or white as two colours in the centre. The propensity to look upwards at you has actually been bred into smaller plants of Aquilegia, smaller species that have been hybridized to have this looking up at you. And as you can see with this Winky series, they're looking directly up. Why would they do this? The reason is commercial growing. Aquilegias, especially when in flower, which is when they would sell, are large ungainly plants that are very top heavy and blown over by the wind and will tangle in with each other. Instead, they will breed them for short, petite plants that are possibly up to about knee high and probably less than that. But then, because Aquilegias, very often you have to tilt their chins and look inside their faces so that you can really get to know them, they have compensated by the short stature by making sure they look up at you. So that's the Winky series, just to give you an idea of how they may interbreed different propensities from different species. So we're back now to the American species from the US again. This is Formosa. Formosa means beautiful, and I think we can agree that bright red with the yellow. And bright red and yellow in American species Aquilegias are seen time and time again. There are quite a lot of red and yellow Aquilegias over there. Now, what would naturally pollinate these Aquilegias? Over here we have bumblebees. Bees aren't going to be pollinating. Moths aren't going to pollinate these because insects do not see red. They do not see this bright, clear red. When you see this colour red in a flower, think the pollinator will be a bird. And oh my goodness, how I'd love to see this. These are pollinated by hummingbirds. The hummingbird will come up, look right up and put their tongue deep in here to get the nectar. In doing so, their throat area will be dusted with the pollen, which will hopefully be transferred to another plant. where the pollen will be transferred to the stigma, up the style to the ovary, and the seeds will be produced. And I want to share the next species, again, red and yellow. Hey, how about that? Now, this is Aquilegia canadensis. Yeah, it comes from Canada, but it's also found in the US. So as I say, variations on the same theme. And I think you can see perhaps how wide these spurs are. Compare that to the ones that were moss pollinated, which were very, very long spurs, but very narrow. This is much thicker because you've got to get the hummingbird to be able to get up here with its beak and its tongue to go right up to the top. So I hope that you've enjoyed this little exploration of some of the many and varied species of Aquilegias that are grown. I'm Carrie Thomas, I'm from Touchwood Plants, and I've had a lifelong interest in Aquilegias, and I also sell seeds on my Touchwood Plants website. But this series of talks on Aquilegias has been very kindly brought to you by the Ranunculaceae group of the Hardy Plant Society, and more information can be found below.